All right, today we're gonna learn how to systematically balance our compositions. For anything in this real world to truly be balanced, it needs to have equal yet opposing forces being applied to it. And this often takes on the form of an equation. But to put it practically, let's say we've got a plane, and this plane weighs 10,000 pounds, which means it's got a downward force vector of 10,000. So for this plane to maintain its altitude as it's flying, it needs to generate 10,000 pounds of lift. So if that concept rings true, and I were to be so bold as to apply math and science to the creative arts, then I think for us to create balanced compositions in our photography and in our filmmaking, we need to understand that there is an equation going on, and we need to have a good grasp as to the different weights that the components of our composition carry. Starting from the top and working our way down, the element that's going to carry the most amount of weight in our composition is going to be areas of highly saturated color. Most notably reds, orange, and yellows, but this applies to all colors on the spectrum. Subconsciously, that is going to be the first thing that our eye picks up on when we're presented with an image or a frame. So it's going to carry the most amount of weight in this composition balancing equation that we're making here today. The next composition element to weigh in is going to be the areas of highest exposure within our frame, the highlights. For the sake of composition, our eye is looking for the brightest part of the image after highly saturated color. If I were to show you a black and white frame, like so, your eye will immediately go to the brightest part of that image, which means it's going to carry a significant amount of weight in our composition equation. The next item will broadly be labeled as details, specifically areas that have highly concentrated detail, very busy areas within the frame. That's going to get your brain wondering what's going on in that part of the image that is so busy. What's happening there? I should look at that, which carries weight, right? Inversely, to areas of highly concentrated detail are going to be areas of no detail or negative space. Negative space is also going to get your mind wondering, why is nothing going on there? What's the purpose of it being there in the frame? I don't think it carries as much weight as areas of high concentration of detail, but I've lumped them together here for the sake of a nice concise list. I think they weigh similarly in comparison to the highlights or the brightest part of the image and color. I think both of those carry significant more weight than detail, but that is going to be the next item on our list. Just above the last item, which is going to be the areas with little to no exposure, the shadow regions. As I just mentioned, our eye is drawn towards the light and away from the darkness. So as our viewer analyzes the frame, they may never actually truly make it to the darkest parts of the image to really analyze what's going on there. The areas of low exposure are going to carry the least amount of weight. That's the concept. Now let's begin to put this into practice so we can really cement this into our brains and apply this to better our filmmaking or better our photography, because that's what we're here to do on this channel, is to become the best filmmakers or photographers that we can possibly become. All right, let's revisit our plane analogy from the beginning. We said that for our plane to maintain altitude, it needed to have equal yet opposing forces acting on it. Now, to apply that to our filmmaking and photography compositions, let's say we have a really strong light source in our image, a highlight. We know that highlight is going to carry a lot of weight. So we need to have an opposing yet equally weighted component to our composition. So the opposite of light would be dark, shadow regions. But we learned that our shadow regions don't carry as much weight. So in order to balance out that strong light source, we're going to need a lot of shadow regions. We're going to need a disproportionately high amount of shadow regions to best balance that strong light source. So let's pull up our first still for reference, and this is from the movie Asteroid City. We're going to use this frame to illustrate the effect that highly saturated colors have on the balance of our composition. Right away, you're going to be drawn to the highly saturated reds in the lip, in the makeup box, and in the curtain. You also have some pretty high saturation levels in the bathtub, that cyan color. Now, if we look at this in proportion to the entire frame, I would say that these areas of high saturation make up about 20% of the frame. And the reason that this works, and this is a good balanced composition, is because we know that those areas of high saturation carry a lot of weight. And to balance that, what they've done here is they've given us roughly 80% of our frame which is an area of very low saturation. It's that equal yet opposite force. Okay, you're seeing that in the bathroom tile, in the curtain, in the floor, in the stool. You got areas of very low saturation to balance those areas of high saturation. Our next frame is going to come from a movie called The Man Who Wasn't There, shot by Roger Deakins. I chose a black and white frame specifically for this example to strip away the color, and that way we can focus on the effect that exposure has on creating a balanced composition. Now, right away, when you look at this frame, you're going to be drawn to our subject here, and more specifically, the doorway that he's coming out of. That is the brightest part of the image. We know that carries a lot of weight, and our eye subconsciously is going to be drawn right there. If we look at this in proportion to the rest of the image, we have a really nice balanced composition because we have an equal yet opposite force, and that is, the opposite of our shadow is, the opposite of our highlight is going to be our shadow. Proportionately, if 10% of our image here is highlight, 90% of our image is going to be composed of areas of low exposure. If we were to make that less dramatic of a ratio, if I were to crop out some of those shadow areas and we give ourselves a composition that is more of a 50-50, highlights versus shadows, this begins to feel a little bit more chaotic. You're not exactly sure where to look anymore. It doesn't feel quite as balanced. Let's talk about detail then. We said earlier that areas with a high concentration of detail in one area tends to draw the eye. In this next example, we're looking at the Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Okay, we have a relatively evenly exposed image. There aren't any dramatic highlights or dramatic shadows, so we're not going to be drawn either which way based on exposure. We have a really pretty saturated image. Yeah, the red hats do draw the eye as we would expect them to, but they're pretty minimal in the frame. I chose this one as an example. You are drawn immediately to this cluster of people, specifically what's going on here. And I believe the reason for that is because in relation to the frame, we have such a high concentration of detail happening in that one area. Again, illustrating that point of how it draws your eye. And this composition works and feels balanced because that area of high detail is met with its counterpart with its opposite, which is vast areas of negative space. And that really helps to create that balance within the image using just detail. The last point that I wanted to illustrate for you was how little weight the shadow regions carry in an image. So this still is from Children of Men. When you look at it, you're going to be immediately drawn to this car, specifically the headlights, because they are the brightest part of the image and they carry a lot of weight. Our frame is dominated by this whole forest area, and you're going to spend little to no time studying and analyzing what's happening in that shadow region because it doesn't command your attention. So I wanted to just illustrate that point for you to showcase how little weight that the shadow regions actually carry, but they are so important because the reason that this is a good balanced composition is because of the way the highlights are opposed by those shadows. All right, that's going to give us a lot to think about as we move forward with our composition. Let's try to put it into practice as I try to recompose one of my own images to create something that is a little bit more balanced. So this image is from New Orleans, Louisiana. It is at the World War II museum that's there. Incredible architecture and some really dynamic lighting coming into this courtyard here. As we begin to analyze this frame, we're going to first look at what's carrying the most weight. It's a pretty desaturated image. There aren't any color pops that are really drawing your eye too much. So we begin to look at our highlighted regions, our areas of highest exposure. Those will carry the most weight next. I think our subject here, our person here, especially her highlighted side, is a pretty bright part of the image, and that's going to catch your eye. But that's also in competition with the sky that you can see coming in through the building. So we've got two areas that are really pretty bright. As far as the proportion of lights to darks in this image, it seems to be split pretty 50-50 between shadow regions and highlighted regions. We know that's not going to be incredibly balanced. Because those highlighted regions carry more weight, we're going to need more of a shadow area to offset and create a balanced composition. All right, so then we begin to look at detail. And as far as detail goes, our highest area of concentrated detail is definitely coming from this truss structure and the plants that are off to the left side of our frame here. We have some other areas of detail off to the right side of the frame, and then a pretty good amount of what I would call mostly negative space. So the ratio here isn't too bad. But what we want to do is try to recompose this in a way that's going to maybe eliminate some of our highlighted sky that's peeking through, that's drawing the eye away from our subject. We're also going to see if we can strike a better balance of shadows to highlights, something that favors a little bit more shadow. So let's see if we can't pull something off like that. I'm gonna crop this vertically, I think, and see what we can come up with there. So if I were to recompose in a manner such as this, now this begins to feel much more balanced to me, and there's a couple reasons for that. Let's see if I can strike it a little bit better. Nope, I think I liked where I was at before. All right, so having recomposed in this manner, we begin to reassess the image now, and we start with our areas of highest exposure that carry the most weight. Now, the only area of highlight is our subject in that strip of light that she's standing in. We strike a much better balance of shadow to highlights in that maybe 70% of this image is now in the shadow region, whereas only 30% might be highlighted. As far as detail goes, we've eliminated a lot of our areas of high concentration of detail, and now the area of highest concentration of detail is our subject, and that is offset by all the negative space around her. Okay, so I would say this is a much more balanced composition. A well-balanced image is going to be the most easily digested by a viewer and arguably the most satisfying to look at. So next time you're out shooting, pause for just a moment and consider your frame. See if you can figure out what's carrying the most weight within your composition, and ask yourself if you have enough in opposition to counterbalance that weight. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or thoughts, let me know down in the comments below. Happy shooting out there. God bless.